Um, I think we're live on air now, so welcome everybody to this Google Hangout in week 2 of the Contract Management MOOC. I'm delighted to be joined by our panel of experts today, who I will introduce in a second. So we welcome all of our participants from the MOOC, but also to our IACCM members as well, who are joining as this is this week's Ask the Expert. So the topic that we're going to be covering today is technology, artificial intelligence, digitization. Words like this are on the tip of everybody's tongue at the moment. There are huge implications, but what are the realities for all of us in this profession? Really, are we going to lose our jobs, or is life going to become the utopia that we all dream it to be? So without further ado, I will ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. We have Tim Cummins, Roger Strathausen, and Jan van Hoeke. So I'm going to pass to Tim just to introduce yourself and say hello, Tim.
Thank you, Sally. And yes, I'm Tim Cummins, the CEO of IACCM. Certainly this issue of technology, automation, artificial intelligence and continuing jobs is something that's a very live issue for us and our members. So certainly look forward to this opportunity to share our perspectives and viewpoints, but very importantly to also involve some who have some real expertise in the topic. So let's pass to you first of all, Roger.
Well, thank you, Tim. My name is Roger Strathausen. I am an independent business consultant located here in Berlin. And I'm working together right now with the SAP Contract Management Department. And together with Kai Jakob and another co-editor from NetApp, we're bringing a book with Springer by the end of this year, which is called Liquid Legal, Transforming Legal into a Business-Savvy, Information-Enabled, and Technology-Driven Industry. And so that's how I came into this topic. One of the big aspects, of course, is technology in the legal in-house, but also for law firms, for all of legal professionals, what the impact will be. And happy to be here today.
And hi, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So hi as well, everybody. Thanks for the invite, Tim and Sally. I'm Jan van Hoeke. I'm the CTO of a technology company called Raven Systems. We're based in London. We sometimes still call us a startup, but we're actually about 40 people, so we're not that small anymore. And our mission and what we do on a day-to-day basis is we build robots, and that's software robots, that can automatically read contracts and pull out the information from this big Word document or PDF document that you have lying on your desk in order to achieve certain business goals. And they can be, we have various use cases of why you would want to do that, but essentially we make it possible for machines to understand what is in contracts. And in a way we kind of look at the old world, or the current world as it is, which is the contracts which are paper contracts, but we're very interested in to see how the future looks like and how structured contracts might make our types of software obsolete.
Thank you, Jan, thank you, Roger, and thank you, Tim. So I'm Sally Hughes, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of IACCM. I'm going to be facilitating the discussion between our experts today and chipping in every now and then perhaps as well. You're all free to ask questions at any time on the chat screen, so please do feel free to drop in your questions, and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as we can. And forgive me, because you might see me turning my head from time to time, and that's because I'm checking on questions that are coming through, so not because I'm not interested in what's going on. So without further ado, we have already received some questions, and one of the first questions that I wanted to pose to you as a panel is this concept of a number of people feeling that artificial intelligence technology, it's not going to affect me, it's not going to ever touch me. It's rarely touched the legal world. The legal profession has a reputation of being perhaps the laggards when it comes to technology, but perhaps also feeling that really it's not relevant to them as a community. One of the comments that came through was that because there are so many variables and so many unknowns in contract management, that in fact any sort of concept of technology and standardization impacting and supporting contract management is really irrelevant and inappropriate. So Tim, perhaps I'll come to you first. You know, are people right? Will technology and digitization not affect them in the contract management field?
It will absolutely affect them. It is already affecting them. It has already affected them. If you look at any major corporation, it has moved steadily toward high levels of standardization. As you know, Sally, of course, my major work on re-engineering of contracts was at IBM Corporation in the 1990s. We had so many variations of contracts and of individual terms and conditions that we lost count. It was pointless trying to count them. It was literally hundreds of thousands of differences, often very minor, just because a particular attorney decided to change a word, a clause, or whatever, but it led to infinite variability, which made management of terms and conditions and management of risk virtually impossible. IBM absolutely proved that it could create a high level of standardization across all the countries of the world, and as a result, of course, it dramatically improved its business controls. More importantly, actually, it was done in association with the implementation of SAP, because one of the realizations was you could not have standardized business processes if you had absolutely no clue what your contractual commitments were. And the SAP implementation saved the corporation literally billions of dollars each year. So there will be absolutely no tolerance for a professional group that stands in the way and says, this can't be done. If we want to ultimately sow the seed of destruction of that profession, then resisting standardization and technology is about the best way to do it. Apart from that, I have no strong opinion.
What a relief. Roger, let me come to you next.
Yes, so I think one of the reasons why many contract managers who are, not always, but often also lawyers, why they believe that technology will not affect them that much is because they see their work as highly qualitative. They see their work as being comprised about, in essence, about legal reasoning, about communication with other people, about finding common grounds, negotiating, which are all very abstract and we might say intellectual human activities, and it's hard to imagine a software that can really completely replace that. And even what we're talking about today in artificial intelligence is mostly weak artificial intelligence. So it's teaching machines to maybe become like an expert, or to work with large amounts of data, go through large amounts of documents and relevant stuff. And so see, these people might think that's all nice and fine, but that's not my job. That's not what I really do. It's not the core of the value that I contribute. And partly I agree with that. So personally, I think there will always be a place for lawyers and for contract managers. But I do believe that technology, as Tim said, already has affected the job of contract managers and lawyers very much, and it will continue to do so, coming from the outside, from the fringes, and kind of taking more and more away of these kind of normal, standardized, high-volume activities that used to be part of the big package. I am a contract manager. I have my work package, and part of it is that I, do some administrative stuff, but the core of it is, of course, this legal reasoning. But by kind of taking away these surrounding activities, I think technology has already affected the job, and it will continue to do so. And I always think if something is not stoppable, if there's something coming that you can't really avoid, and it is coming towards the legal departments and the contract departments because the executives demand it. They look at the numbers. Business people, they want more efficiency. They want more with less. So it's coming towards you. Then my feeling has always been, get in the driver's seat. Don't block it. Don't try to stay away, or it will bypass me. Try to take an active role and steer the train and car and to make it go in a way that you want to. Otherwise, you might just be run over.
Thank you, Roger. Jan?
So I think one of the ways of, I know if you look at the contracts and I guess the entire domain in one go, it can seem very overwhelming that part of it could be standardized or automated. However, one of the ways maybe to look at it is to break it down into different levels or different layers in a stack, and that kind of makes it. And if you do that, you can actually start seeing that every layer in that stack, there is a way of having technology hugely improving things. To start at the lowest level, we have what we call the syntax, for instance. It's how you express certain things in a contract, the actual pure language or the medium where it carries on. And currently that medium is Microsoft Word in let's say in 99% of the cases. And Microsoft Word is not much more than a digital reflection of a piece of paper. So in terms of the step that you've made forward by switching to Word, it's very little actually. We're still working in a paper world. And that's very clear when you actually see that contracts then get printed and signed and scanned and sent over to the other party. Now, already on that level, I think there's quite an improvement that can be made, as in which will encourage reuse, which will improve the negotiation part of it. And at that step, we can already embed hints for machines to understand what you're actually writing in those contracts. And then I think there's largely parts, maybe you could say, let's entertain the idea that it's not possible to standardize everything. You could also say, look at it the other way, is that there is a huge part which can be standardized, not just in types of contracts, but within a contract. There's recurring things which you can see a red thread through. Everything which has the legalese in it, the parties and the terms and the definitions and the transferability of a contract. I mean, there's, of course, it differs from type of contract, so it's a big world of taxonomies of different sizes, but there is definitely a red thread. And then if you look at the very bespoke things you would want to write into it, maybe you still want to use full natural language, but maybe in a way that the machine understands that in a sentence you're expressing something that has an impact on one of the parties, and if there's a time-bound period to it, and what the actual description is. So I think even there, where you want to have the freedom of expressing things, we'll work towards a world where the machines are understanding it, and if machines understand what you're writing, understand is of course not understanding in an intelligent way, but if they can interpret what you're writing, it will abruptly change things. Just one final thing is sometimes I make the analogy with what the engineers went through, where calculations, maths for instance, calculations were done on paper. Well, before computers were around. Then they started using mechanical machines, and it was impossible at that point to imagine that symbolic computation, like symbolic reasoning on mathematics, was possible with machines. But right now it's a standard tool that every engineer has. But engineers are still around. I mean, it didn't threaten the job of the engineer. It just made them so much more efficient in what they do. So they standardized and they brought technology in their world.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's a very, very interesting analogy. And Tim, I want to pose this one to you. That we talk about the fact that there are so many variables in contracting. Are we as a community causing those variables? Are we responsible for creating so much complexity ourselves in an environment that really should be and could be much more simple, much more fluid? But is that always the case when you consider, for example, incredibly complex construction contracts, for example? Does the standardization always work?
I don't think standardization, of course, means the elimination of variability. It means more standardized variability. So nobody is suggesting that there's going to be one global form of contract. Nobody is suggesting that different industries don't have at times different levels of requirement. But there is, of course, a high degree of standardization already. If you looking at several dimensions. There is a standardized view amongst lawyers that it's a good job it's a good idea to involve a lawyer in drafting a contract. There's nothing compulsory, there's nothing that says you have to do that. And of course, many people don't use lawyers to develop their contracts. But, you know, there would be a standardized view that that's desirable in just the same way as we have a standardized view that if we're sick, we want medical advice. But I think if you look at the comparison, say, of medicine, Sally, it's an interesting one. Obviously, another long-standing professional group. Yet increasingly, medicine advanced because standards developed, because doctors pooled knowledge in a way that they could then undertake common forms of diagnostic. They pooled knowledge in a way that they could begin to identify the best treatments for different types of disease. And yet the interesting thing is now, it not only has been dramatically impacted by technology, for example, the way that diagnostics is undertaken, the way that scanning is undertaken. If one has a disease, you know, going into that diagnostic stuff is going in electronically to a center which undertakes far more rapid and accurate diagnosis. Increasingly as people, we don't any longer go and see the doctor. We look up our symptoms on Google and we self-diagnose, and then we go to treatment centers. So I think we're going to see just the same evolution. That this is moving, as you and I have talked about at our recent conference, we're moving from an analog world of individual judgment and let's hope that the person we consult really does know what they're talking about, to a digital world where we can verify and validate. I was going through a health test the other day, and it's very interesting that the doctor was constantly referring to the internet for all of the information and advice that she was providing me. I must admit, I reached the point where I thought to myself, why on earth am I here? I could have just done this at home. But I think, you know, we are seeing professional advice and guidance changing fundamentally. I do think, you know, Jan's point, and I think the point he made, and certainly strikes me, is that certainly the sort of technologies that somebody like Raven is providing does, of course, in many ways reduce the need for individual standards, because the machine will standardize, if you like. It will do the analysis and turn the words into those digital keystrokes. It will extract meaning and find similarities. So the fact that, but just a final point, as I said, it is an illusion to believe that lawyers don't operate to rough standards. I mean, if you talk to any two lawyers about the portfolio of clauses that you would need in a construction contract, they will actually come up with a very, very similar list of content. Their deviation, their variation is actually more in the words they choose to use than the content that they choose to put into it.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And the questions are coming in thick and fast, so I'm going to try and address them as best I can as they're coming in. So we've had one question here from, oh, forgive my pronunciation, De Carvalho from Brazil, who says the world itself and the law requires a solid understanding of technology. Clients and companies are less tolerant about lawyers who don't know how to use the tools available. In your point of view, how can lawyers be better prepared to this new outlook? How can they become technically competent within a so widening world of possibilities and trends? And of course, I will point out that we're not just honing in on lawyers today, because we are talking about contract management more generally, and it's not just lawyers who are involved, as Tim rightly said, in the production and management of contracts, and very often, certainly in the management of contracts, the lawyers have nothing to do with it. So, but Jan, perhaps I'll come to you with this one. You know, it is true, and as I mentioned at the beginning, unfortunately, this whole field has a reputation for not embracing technology. So your organization, obviously, Raven, you focus in on technology. How do we embrace all of the opportunities and not be so fearful of it? Because I think some of the reason behind people saying, oh, it's not going to affect me, it's never going to bother me, is a fear factor.
Yeah, so I get the point. Actually, I sat into a lecture by Professor Dan Katz a couple of weeks ago, and he said, like, how come there's so little mathematical minds in the law world? So he actually called that into the audience. And they are the ones who are more thinking in technology terms as well, or in statistics. And since there's clearly a lack in it, maybe it's a personality type of thing that people with a certain statistical skill do become lawyers. Of course, there's exceptions, so I don't want to generalize. But just to say is, I think the pioneers in this, they will have to be a bit more geeky as the pioneers in every type of new technology. But it is really up to the vendors and the technology firms. That's the beauty of an economy like the ones we work in. The ones that will survive will be the ones that make tools that are actually so well made that the lawyers don't experience it as a burden, but experience it as a huge benefit to use. I mean, we say that they're maybe not technologists, but they all have iPhones and iPads, and that's one of the most ultimate points of our current technology industry. I mean, the complexity of those devices on the internal is humongous, but the user interface and the usability makes it accessible to virtually everybody. So I think there's a call on the technology companies to make sure that it's seen as an easy route forward. We had just one final comment. We had one of our first projects that we did in this contract reading was with a firm called BLP. One of the comments we got afterwards was we thought it was going to be so complex when you talk about AI and data science, and we were kind of afraid. But the process of how you talk us through it and you take us through it makes it look so simple, as in you take that complexity away. And that's how it should be. You know, the people who know about the technology complexity, they should take that away. And we do that either as a service engagement, but I think there's or as a tool, but that's really, I think, what's going to solve this problem.
Roger, yeah.
Yes, if I may add to this. The question was, how can lawyers become technically more competent? And I think lawyers or contract managers will become technically competent if they see the benefits. So, Jan, like you said, they need to see how this is relevant in my daily work and how it makes things better. And so that's the first answer to this question, and I think there's really a call upon the technology vendors to, like Jan, like you said, to increase usability. And one assumption one might make is that if contract people are not using the software as much as one would like to, maybe it is also because it's not as user-friendly as they would need it, and as maybe there's a lack of guidance into this. And that brings me to my second point, which is education. And the way that, now again, it's not only lawyers, but at least how lawyers are trained and how, I guess, the mindset is in contracting, which is more or less, I think, an adversarial mindset. And Tim, I think you and Sally, you point that out very often in your lectures, that you say, there is this idea when I make a contract, I want maximum protection for myself, and then, and I have to fight the other side to get that maximum protection because they want maximum protection for themselves. So it's a battle. And kind of adversarial mindset leads to complexity. That's the reason why things get bigger and bigger, and I want that statement, and what if this and this happens, I have to protect. And this kind of mindset then might make things so complex that we think we can't standardize that, or we don't need technology. So I think if we already in the education, people were taught more that there is a beneficial side, and look at contracting more in a collaborative way. And you're always talking about agile contracting, dynamic contracting, where we say this is the common goal, this is what we want to do, and let's maybe have room to kind of adjust things later on as we go ahead, and we don't have to think about all possibilities and what could end up in court already right at the beginning. If this mindset were to be there, then I think contracts would be less complex and there would be a better chance for technology to deliver value.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it's wonderful because it brings me on to a part of a question. And forgive me, this is from Ian Wakeling. Forgive me, Ian, because your question's quite long, but so I'm going to just take a subset of it, which I hope is okay. But the question is, and Tim, I'm going to throw this one at you first again. Can we expect that in time artificial intelligence will in effect replace the emotional side of negotiations. So picking up, Roger, a little bit on what you were saying about how the negotiation works. Will it in effect replace the emotional side of a negotiation that ends up finding that compromise and mutuality, or will the artificial intelligence be so binary as to create standoffs where one AI representing one person can't accept the terms of another party's AI, and they have no ability to find a workaround because of the logic? Now, you know, that's quite a complex question, and I guess it really depends on everybody's view as to whether artificial intelligence can actually start to have this sort of emotional capacity. But Tim, what's your view on that? What's your thoughts?
This is such a fascinating topic. I think it is important to bear in mind that every embedded working group has always resisted technology. I mean, the Luddites obviously are ones that are famous, but you know, people have for forever wandered around destroying technologies that they feel threaten their job. So I think one of the critical points here is that it does have to be adaptive, it does have to be intelligent in the way it's deployed, but at the end of the day, technology adoption depends upon whether or not it is really bringing tangible social benefit, and that benefit is typically measured, of course, in terms of whether or not it's making people rich. And what we're beginning to see is a new variant of the very primitive early technologies in the contract management space and the legal space, now evolving to very usable and useful tools that do dramatically cut the cost of provisioning. And of course, what we're seeing is law firms themselves now beginning to adopt these technologies because of the financial benefit it gives and the eradication of boring work, which is why machines took over in things like the cotton industry, even though many of the traditional workers who were used to hand sewing violently, literally violently resisted them, became very emotional. So what about a negotiation? Well, I guess, and it is a very interesting point. I think the emotion and its focus will change dramatically. Already we're working with organizations that are saying, hold on a minute, where we need to be making emotional judgment is much more around the culture of our counterparty. We need to determine whether or not we've actually got similar views and values on life and the world. Not whether we have a common understanding of what a good limitation of remedies clause or a good indemnities clause is. Where artificial intelligence is already, and technology can already be demonstrated to bring tremendous benefit to negotiation, is dramatically short time, and it can dramatically improve the value of what is being negotiated, because AI is much better at identifying the potential trade-offs between people and organizations based upon their relative values of the different terms and conditions. And as you know, we did a little pilot experiment on that with the recent IACCM conference in Rome, where we're starting to look at some of those technologies which actually keep people apart and take the low value add emotion out of the negotiation room and bring objective thinking. Does it mean that you don't have people in the background who are then providing different evaluation and judgment? No, it doesn't. But what they're doing is the valuable stuff, and what we're eliminating is the stuff that is actually better done by the impersonal machine.
Roger, I know you're familiar with what Tim was referencing, the negotiation tool that we were looking at the IACCM conference recently. So what are your thoughts on whether or not AI is going to bring more or less or different emotion to the negotiation table?
So it makes logical sense when you think about it that you have two sides kind of negotiating a contract with a software that says, oh, there's room on this part because this person has indicated there's some room to leverage here, and the other side has indicated that also, but not directly to the other person, but mediated through the software. Then it becomes more rational. And it makes sense to me, but what I was most struck by was, Tim, the story that you told at the beginning at this workshop with the software, when you said that you made a comparison between two groups, one group negotiating this kind of software directly and the person to person, and the other group negotiating it via a kind of software or medium tool. And as I recall it, you said that the success rate with the software negotiation was actually higher than with the in-person negotiation. And one of the reasons might be that in in-person things, you're not as rational, and you might be turned off by how the other person looks or reacts or treats you or whatever it could be. Whereas if you really focus on the issue, there's a clear gain, and like you said, there's interests on both sides. If you find the best common ground for which there is some kind of algorithm, I'm sure, then it seems likely or more likely that the deal comes together, and so. It does make sense to me. Now, whether, and that is interesting to add maybe, Ed Taylor, one of the co-founders of this software called Synergist that we saw in Rome, he said he clearly positioned the software as mostly applying to low-value, high-volume deals, so not the complex construction deal for a couple of $100 million, but for the simple deals that might not come about if, if the people had so much time and effort and personally negotiate. So that also makes sense to me that most likely taking emotions out and focusing on the rational side of things works in a simple environment. If you make the environment or the deal, the scope more complex, very difficult to think that technology can be the sole solution.
Jan, do you have some thoughts around this whole piece?
Just 2 points around the emotional involvement. We actually already see that. So one example of cases we do is where we read contracts which are in effect and check them for certain things. It's kind of a due diligence exercise where 10,000 contracts need to be reviewed against a certain checklist. A process which traditionally is done by paralegals or by junior lawyers. And you can see that they've actually observed internally in firms doing this review is that there's variation on the quality depending on the day, the time of the day, how much sleep they had the night before, whether they're doing it in the weekend. And already there you can see that the machine makes mistakes, but it makes them very consistently. It's not affected at all by times or emotions. It's more a very technical rule-based mistake making. There's always a good reason why it was. While you do not have that with humans, and we always have to prove our software and show that it can do what a human can do. But in that process, typically what they uncover is also that there's mistakes in the human process, and that sometimes those mistakes are of an emotional or circumstantial nature. And the second point about the standoff, and I think it was an interesting question. I didn't really think about it that way, but I think an AI that gets to a standoff is not going to be one that sells very well. So I think just by the nature of the market, AIs that just block themselves in an eternal loop are not going to be the ones that are going to be commercially very viable. But I think there's ways around it. And to be honest, I think we should take it step by step. There's a lot of hype of AI in legal. The steps we're talking about when the AI start negotiating on behalf of their clients to achieve certain goals, that's one of the further steps away, thinking what you should expect to see as a product in the market.
And Jan, another question for you then, because I think it's quite interesting, and particularly in terms of the technology that you are working with. A lot of the technology today is used to address complexity, to try and make sense of the complexity. So, and we're aware, for example, in the US government that they've introduced artificial intelligence to try and make sense of the federal acquisition rules, and there are thousands and thousands of bound pages. So if we're working on the basis of artificial intelligence and technology and digitization, focusing on making sense of the complexity, are we at risk then of not focusing in on how it's going to address and create simplicity of itself from the outset?
Yeah, so I guess what we're doing is fixing a problem that we've introduced by the nature of how we work. And there's actually a way of rethinking certain things. But I think but the thing is, starting from scratch is a very difficult thing. Yeah. So it's a lot simpler to iteratively work towards a situation where things become better. And I think what we will first do is increase the simplicity of our lives. Maybe still having the subject matter being very complicated, but in bringing simplicity by using technology. And then the step beyond that is we will get used to this, or we'll see like actually what's happening here is we have this kind of band-aid thing on a process that could be simplified. And step by step, the simplicity could be introduced in it. That could be technological simplicity, or actually on the content, as you propose. So simplify what it is that actually is being exchanged in this contract.
Tim, we've often talked about the challenge of technology in this field, and how the software hasn't always addressed the real needs of the profession, of the community as a whole. Do you think there's a risk that that's going to happen still with AI, with this new technology, or are we going to get it right this time?
I think we are seeing a much stronger level of engagement by the community in the definition of practical utilization. As I said earlier, I think the shifting point for any technology is when you begin to see individuals from within a professional group or a job group beginning to realize, hello, this isn't actually a threat to me, this is an opportunity for me. And clearly we are seeing, just as we saw with legal process outsourcing, which again many people said that will never happen. Idea of moving jobs to India or the Philippines, that's ridiculous. They don't know, they don't understand, they haven't been through 54 years of law school, so of course they can't do the job. And of course they can do the job, and they're doing it in a large degree also with the support of automation. But I think, the reason that happened was because you had some entrepreneurial lawyers who said, hello, I can make quite a lot of money out of doing this. If I move stuff to a low-cost environment, that gives me a competitive advantage. I can move a lot of the boring, repetitive work that can be standardized, and I can do it much cheaper, much faster, etc. So they're making a lot of money. And we'll see exactly the same happen with artificial intelligence. Jan already knows that. He's already working with law firms that say to themselves, actually, AI can bring, as he rightly said, standardization where it doesn't exist. It can use a standardized technology in order to do analytics across a complex portfolio, large portfolio of documents. We can look for similarities, and as a result, we'll substantially reduce the cost of performance. That will enable our law firm to win more business, and we can still charge people less money. So the key to this is win-win. And what we're seeing a movement towards is that win-win environment with the technology.
Thank you, Tim. We lost you a little bit there, but Roger, I'm going to come to you actually, because there's another very apt question from Matteo Lavero, and he says one thing is contract production, another thing is contract management. Technology may assist the former better than the latter, so technology may assist contract production better than contract management.
That is interesting, because intuitively, when you asked the question, read out the question, I thought it would be the other way around, suggested by the listeners, because so it depends obviously on how we define contract production and contract management. Now, when I think of contract management, I think of the environment that I work in SAP. Thousands of contracts with vendors, with suppliers, with clients, with partners, contracts with companies that SAP has bought. So now you have all these legacy contracts, and they have a different terminology and nomenclature, and you need to integrate that into your repository. So one thing that I can say how SAP manages contracts is the idea that there should be one repository, one central repository, and that there should be a kind of a contract life cycle that is supported through technology. Now, if that is meant by management, my feeling is that technology support is better with the management. When I think of contract production, I must admit I'm not a lawyer, and besides my only contracts, I don't negotiate many contracts. You know, my contracts are simple or protected. But when I think of contract production, I would think there's much more a human, qualitative aspect in there. There are interests. There are interests maybe of the organization. Maybe there are even interests of the individual contract managers who are negotiating the deals, who might have certain reasons to do it this way or that way. It might not necessarily be reflecting company interests. So I would think that the production side, it would be interesting now to kind of discuss with the listener to understand how she or he meant that, but that's my initial reaction to this differentiation between production and management of contracts.
Tim, what do you think about the production versus management? Do you think that technology is going to be better in one place or the other, or do you think it's going to be all pervasive?
I think, of course, both. There is a somewhat different requirement, but of course we are already seeing quite extensive automation through the, for example, extraction of the obligation within contracts, and it's automatic flow through into other business systems. Contract management in a wider sense engages a myriad of people, both within and outside of organizations. So the use of technology to communicate those obligations and then to oversee whether or not they are being performed is something that absolutely is happening now on a large scale. I think we come back to the point, are the early systems doing this completely adequate? No, they're not. They are obviously working far better in highly standardized environments. So areas like the health sector, where there are, of course, very standardized agreements. Those sectors which have high levels of consistency in the nature of the contracts they are required to perform are those where there's been biggest initial success of automation in the post-award contract area. But now what artificial intelligence is starting to do is deliver that same sort of benefit, even getting non-standard.
So yeah, and is digitization, technology, artificial intelligence, all these buzzwords, is this going to be a silver bullet for the world of contract management? Is this it? Is this going to be how we create a utopia in our world?
I think we've never really been able in any aspect to create a utopia. It's just about making the world a better place than it was before. But I think so. It just to also, in the same way, reply to the previous question, because it's kind of related. Imagine contract lifecycle management systems are a very good example of how they will become better, and they will become better and really delivers a better service. Right now, they are for a large part document management systems with a workflow around it and with metadata attached to it. But essentially, the system treats it as a document. I'm sure that there's exceptions to it, but that's what the general products look like. But that's not. So if you as a contract manager get a question like, oh, check all the contracts for the data protection clauses and see if they're, if they are correct and which ones we need to enforce and which way. I mean then they would actually start to have to look and to go into those documents. But really, what the contract could be is in some kind of form where the data protection is already highlighted, so that the contract lifecycle management system understands which part of the contract refers to the question he's asking of it, so that they treat it as actually those CLM systems would be amazing if you could actually, if they would see the contract as the contents of the contract. And what you can achieve then in terms of reporting or doing these checks, or actually integrated in downstream systems where your organization makes use of, it's you know, it's limitless what the ideas are that you can do with it. So I think it will become a better world, at least from the people who are in charge of managing those contracts. The drafting and negotiation process will definitely become better. It's going to be no more copy-pasting from one Word document to another. It will be a lot easier to check what people have changed and to have a full trail of that. So I think that's all going to change. Utopia, yeah, that's. I should actually, as a marketing message, say yes, of course, we're going to create a utopia. I'll buy into technology, but reality is it's the path towards utopia.
And Roger, coming to you, we talked very briefly before we went live about a question that was posed earlier about the impact of cultural diversity, and I think that that's an important point to raise, because we're talking about digitization, but when we discuss this, are we adequately addressing cultural diversity and the comparison between developing and developed countries? Does digitization and artificial intelligence provide some solutions to those cultural issues, for want of a better word, or is it going to further enhance the problems?
So I think it's a fascinating and I also think very hard to answer question. So my initial thought on this is, having participated in a roundtable in Rome with Tom Barton, who had this topic of cultural diversity as well. So my initial feeling is that technology might help to circumvent or avoid some of these cultural issues, simply because people do not necessarily have to be personally together. Because if you are personally together, and now I refer to some of the stories that I heard in this work group, the way you are dressed, the way you behave, the way you treat the others, or in Asian or Japanese business culture, the person who's speaking is most often not the most important or the most senior person. The most senior person is more in the back. Or what I heard, just to give an example, was that in some cultures it's not liked that the presenter stands while the other people sits, because that is seen as patronizing, as belittling of the other people. Now, so there seems to be so many traps that you can fall into when you're in a personal, direct relationship with cultural differences that maybe can be avoided if the whole situation is mediated through technology. If I kind of negotiate or discuss this issue with a tool, so that's my first thought that I have, that might be avoiding some of the complexities and the difficulties that come with being personally together from different cultural backgrounds. That's one thought that I have. On the other hand, we also, just to add that to that, we also sometimes feel that technology or not, desk like we do now, looking into the small frame, that is alienating and that is kind of creating additional barriers. And we sometimes feel that if I were sitting together with you in the room and we would be looking each other in the eyes and be in the same environment, it might be easier to make a personal connection, and it might be more human, and might be better able to understand different positions and resolve conflicts. So, yeah, you can already tell. I don't know how to answer this in one way. I think it's an interesting question, like culture and technology. In the contract negotiation realm, my initial feeling would be it might help to avoid some of the complexities or traps that we could be into when we are really sitting face to face together across different cultures.
Tim, it's a good question.
If I may, I'd love to just pick up on that point, because I think actually contract management and culture is a really critical point. If you think about the purpose of contracts, they are to improve and maintain a record of understanding between people and between organizations. If you think about contracts and contract management in a cultural context, there have historically been a large number of cultures around the world that didn't consider that contracts were necessary. Mm-hmm. If people were trading within a local context, they would often depend entirely on a relationship. They didn't need to write things down. Mm-hmm. What we're actually seeing is the adoption of contracts and contract management as a cross-cultural discipline in order to reduce the potential for misunderstanding and to create a more uniform methodology by which global trade can be conducted. So contract management is a fundamental discipline to enabling a healthy and peaceful global environment, which is why, of course, so much is being written about the dangers of certain politicians who would destroy the international trading system, that this would really erode the potential of world peace. So contracts, in their biggest form, are really this cross-cultural mechanism that helps us to build common understanding, common goals, and a common sense of benefit. That's why they're so critically important, and that's why standardization is occurring in the way they're produced, in the way they're worded, and it's going to continue because this is so important to human wealth and human development.
Thank you, Tim. Jan, do you have any sort of final thoughts for us on this whole topic of the realities of technology in the contract management world?
Just to say that right now we're living in a very paper world, even though it's a digital paper world. And I think as we move out of that paper world, it's going to be it can be quite a revolution. But it's going to be a revolution for the better. It's not to be seen as a burden or a reason to lose your jobs. It's really to be seen as something which will make everybody's lives easier, except maybe for the technologists who have to come up with the technology to support it. But it's, you know, it's also something that cannot be stopped. As the industrial revolution, as the electronic revolution, it is something that we just have to live with. So the best thing I would say is not to fear it, but to fear to do. You know, the thing to fear is to do nothing about it. I would embrace it and try to be on the front path to influence and make sure it goes in the direction that you want it.
Yeah, indeed. Roger?
Yeah, I can only second that. So that, I think at the minimum, I would say everybody who's in this industry and should just be aware it's coming, and it makes sense to concern yourself with it. And I think, Jan, you put it very well. Don't be afraid of it. It's always not fear is not a good. Fear makes us aware that something's going on. In that regard, it's good. It alerts us. But fear sometimes blocks our creativity. It causes us to either fight or flight, and that's with this topic probably not the best attitude. I think the right attitude is to think about it and see how it can be useful and try to work with it and not against it. I think this is something where this is like the common ground of how, and I think we can be critical with technology also. You know, there might be a lot of technology around that does not really take into account the situation of the user, that is not user-friendly. And maybe last thought on this, I think we will see a big step forward in the use of technology for contracting and contract management once we have a standard. And there will be standards. The business industry will tend towards standards because standards make things simpler, faster, less expensive. So the industry, the companies, the law firms, the in-house legal departments, the associations, they will want to standardize, and the technology vendors will provide the standard. And once we have that standard, then adoption will go very quickly, and I think it's safe to say that the law firms and the in-house legal departments who've already concerned themselves with this and who've kind of you know, adopted this kind of technology, they will have an advantage when that comes.
Thank you, Roger. Tim, do you have any final thoughts before we close?
I think, as with every other human activity, when technology comes, it's of course often very difficult to understand how it's going to alter our jobs. It's threatening, but of course the reality is that technology has consistently enabled life to become more interesting. It's changed what we do. It hasn't eliminated what we do. And the technologies that we're seeing today are going to give us dramatic and exciting new sources of information and insight that really does enable us to move to the next phase of development and to build contractor relationships and to manage those relationships with a great degree of reliability, with a great degree of speed. But it's going to give our community just observations and insights and diagnosis that we've just never had before, and which will enable us to provide very different forms of heightened value to the organizations and more broadly to society.
Thank you. I want to finish with a quote, really, rather than a question that's come through from one of our MOOC participants today. So this is from Davor Vidovic. And it says, the industry strives for standardization, and contract management won't be excluded from the process of automation. Nowadays, knowledge databases already populate contract templates based on best practice modules for certain standard contracts. The question is about the appetite to which AI will be applied and the extent to which it will be applied. I think there will be plenty of non-standard opportunities where contract managers can focus and continue to provide value, not doing repetitive tasks. So let's see this trend from a positive view. I thought that was really nice and pretty much encapsulates everything that we talk about. This is an opportunity for our community generally to embrace technology. As Jan, you mentioned, when we break down the tasks, we can identify the tasks where technology is really going to provide a value add to us, to allow us to focus on the more interesting, bespoke, which there always will be an element of bespoke, the more strategic work that needs to be done in our field. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody for participating. Jan, Roger, Tim, thank you so much for your valuable input today. It's been really, really interesting. We could carry on for hours talking about this topic, but we do have to close now. So I appreciate your participation. Thank you everybody for all of your questions, and goodbye.
And Sally, if I may just beat your quote, there was one wonderful quote that was a write-in comment on one of our recent research reports. Somebody wrote in and said, the people who don't adopt technology will be nabbed in the bottom.
Very good.
Not sure what it involves, but it doesn't sound good.
Thank you. Well, on that note, we better embrace it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.